Okay, do we have a quorum? I actually have no idea how many people joined, so I'll give it a minute. Raeesha, do you know how many people are supposed to join so we don't start without anyone?
Let me just ask Ben and I'll get back to you.
Okay.
Good news, I was able to start recording, so this will be available in the future.
Great.
Assuming I don't mess it up between now and the end.
I think we can start and
Okay.
yeah, whoever else will join whenever they are coming.
Okay. So I sort of volunteered myself to be the moderator here. So I'll go first. You heard a little bit about me. I work on e-learning platforms and educational software as a content strategist. Currently a consultant for ETS, which you may know from some horrible experiences in high school. We do the SAT questions, the AP exams, and a whole slew of associated digital products. Now you're older, you also may know the GREs. So my role there kind of straddles microcopy solutions as well as overarching content strategies for websites, applications, and my primary focus are assessment platforms. So that is the whole gamut of authors who write test questions in a platform like a content management system. So I'm doing the microcopy and UX on that. And then the student experience side, how the students experience taking an online exam, from signing up, from taking the exam, answering questions, dynamic question types, dragging interactive components into the answer space and all that. So my focus is highly on education and yeah, so any questions there? I have a robust background in editorial. Prior to this, I worked in textbooks for about 10 years. Then I moved into assessment, and assessment moved into digital, and then I followed suit, and now I'm in UX. So that's me, and I'll pass it to Briana.
Hi, so I'm Briana Morgan. I have been with the city's Office of Innovation and Technology digital transformation team for about a year now, over a year. So I have not met any of my coworkers in person either. But I started out in working in HIV services, a system level service planning kind of organization. It was a really small office. I was there for just under 10 years and did all kinds of different stuff. But one of the things that I learned on the job was how to do anything related to our website. So my previous role, anything that hit the web was my responsibility. I did design, development, built our own web apps, did all of the content and all of the UX writing that we had. And then I came to the city where we have a team of about 15 folks working on the digital transformation team. In my work before and at the city now, I am primarily interested in just making information accessible to more people, particularly people who have been marginalized and underserved. I've given access to information as an important part of creating equitable experiences for people. So that's what I do at work. Partly it's working with different departments, almost like an internal agency, creating a web presence and modernizing some of the terms that people are using to communicate about their services. But we also do some work at the application level, for example, on some vendor payment tools or other individual applications. So my day-to-day is everything from, describing a service for, I don't know, somebody who's trying to access mental health services in plain English to doing some navigation and microcopy for a new web app. And I think that covers it. So Cassie, on to you.
Hi. So I've been with Comcast in experience design for about 3.5 years. I studied journalism in college and started my career in pharmaceutical advertising and was a copywriter. So this was my first UX job. And I joined the team to work on a very specific entertainment product. If you're familiar with the Xfinity voice remote, it was the voice user interface. So TV, cable, voice products. But once I got there and I realized I was kind of the only writer on a team of 100, 200 designers, I kind of branched out and started supporting more and more teams. And now we've built a centralized copy and content practice within the user experience design organization that's 15 people strong and counting. So we're able to support a lot more. Let's get to some questions. What would you like to know? Anybody?
Hi. Yeah, I guess I'll just unmute and talk in the chat. But I was wondering, I'm a product designer currently, and I've been trying to incorporate more like UX writing into it. But something I've been running up against from clients is SEO. So I was wondering just how important that is to your day-to-day job, and is that something you need to be an expert in to be a UX writer?
I can feel that from my perspective. So I've worked, I used to work as a freelancer for AOL back when they were more prominent in the content field. And SEO was huge back then. So I worked on blogs, and it wasn't UX, but it was writing web blogs for Engadget and an associated product called Switch.com. And they would give me a crib sheet every week of the SEO terms that I had to incorporate into the blog. So I had to I was forced to use certain words. Now that I work in e-learning platforms, SEO is definitely not really a major consideration because the platform is super secure. It's test questions and stuff like that. So they're not looking to promote anything. But that said, a lot of the landing pages and advertisements for the products I work on are not behind a paywall or a password wall. So we do get a lot of SEO feedback that if we're not using the appropriate terms to get attention, because my company makes money off people taking the GREs, for instance, so they do want to promote it. And I'd say the experience I had with SEO in my previous gig has definitely helped me kind of be a knowledge holder and kind of look, I guess, more educated in that sense. So when it comes up in conversation, so I think a content strategist should always know the basics of HTML and how it works and how to use Google Analytics and be able to contribute to those conversations, because those are going to be holistic conversations that are discussed in meetings with stakeholders at high levels across the organization. So at the very least, it makes you look good to be able to talk the talk there.
Yeah, I would agree. It definitely can tie into the larger content strategy. But for example, at Comcast, SEO and driving traffic to web pages is more of a concern for like the .com writing team driving acquisition, whereas the more UX UI writing is for people who already own the product. So it's not a concern once people are already customers. But it just speaks to how there is specializations within specializations within specializations.
Yeah, I would say SEO is such an in-depth topic too. Like there's a reason why that there are many people who do that for their whole job. So being conversational in SEO stuff is really, really helpful. But I wouldn't take on complete SEO as like an inherent necessary part of being a UX writer. Unless you really like SEO stuff, and that can be your.
Thank you. That's good to hear.
We had a Mark. Do you want to ask your question on mic?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Briana. Hi, everybody. Long time no see in person with some of the people here. Yeah, I can speak to Cassandra's statement that Comcast is hiring writers, because I'm one of them now, and very happy to be in the customer comms team of Comcast Business.
Whoa.
Congrats.
Thank you. My question for for Briana is it's about yeah, best practices in writing for marginalized groups. And you mentioned the obvious plain language, which
Yep.
I'm always pushing wherever I am. But is there anything else that is special or things that maybe, since obviously the plain language guidelines were probably not put together by a super diverse group either, that you've learned through doing this?
So I would really say it depends on what context you're writing for. Like everything is highly contextual, but there are a lot of really helpful style guides out there for reaching different groups. So there are disability style guides. There are journalist associations for different racial and ethnic groups that can be really helpful. I'm going to mix all of their names up together, but I know because they sound very similar. But there are societies for professional journalists, for there are a society of Black journalists, of Hispanic journalists, of Asian and Pacific Islander journalists, and Native American journalists that are all really helpful when writing about specific groups in that way. Disability writing practices are really hotly contested within the disabled community. Generally, in my work, we default to person first language, which would be, for those who aren't familiar, saying person with disabilities, person with bipolar disorder, rather than a bipolar person or a disabled person. But some folks in the disability communities prefer their status come before the person, because that's an inherent part of who they are. So sometimes you'll come across people who want to hear disabled person. This is more of a what I would recommend than an actual standard. But just coming up with what your style is first, like doing your research and then sticking with whatever your style is, because so many of these things are hotly contested, unless you're working with a specific group and you know what they prefer and you've talked to them about it. The autistic community is another really great example of overwhelmingly families of people who have an autism spectrum disorder prefer the term person with an autism spectrum disorder, while autistic people themselves tend to prefer autistic person. So it's deeply nuanced. But I would say check out the that are and use those as much as possible. And then for situational things as well, there are some resources on trauma-informed writing that are really helpful, but there aren't that many out there. So they can be really handy too, just in terms of for trauma-informed writing, offering a choice rather than telling people they must do something, which comes up in UX writing a lot, unless they actually must do it. But that option, having an option, makes a big difference to someone, as well as knowing what's going to happen next.
That last one's interesting for us as in a business sense, when we do communications related to disasters. You know, a lot of service outages happen, and that's something I would have never thought. Certainly, I would have never thought of until you mentioned it. And certainly, the autism. Yes, we have a mutual friend who is autistic, and she's taught me to be very careful about what I say. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, it's tough when you're talking about things to people, and when there's not, people are all different, so there's not any one right way to do things a lot of the time. So making an effort to be respectful and open to dialogue is an important part of that too.
Okay, it looks like we have Jess, you wrote another question in the chat.
This is a good one too.
Yeah, how do we determine the changes you've made the copy, the success of the changes? Is it something you test with users before launch? So in my world, yes, we do a whole slew of testing. Often we'll use a product like Helio to A/B test the writing, which kind of presents option A, option B. You can use User Zoom Go. There's a whole bunch of platforms out there where you can put the before, the after, or all slews of your potential presentations of the copy, and see what's most effective. Oftentimes that role, in my experience, trickles down to the UX researchers who they'll get the copy, and they might even do a cog lab where they monitor people interacting with your copy and the platform, and then we'll log which copy works directionally to get the user to their end goal quickest. They have ways of recording interactions and clicking on the screen, and the only differences between the two experiences will be the directional copy or the micro copy. I'm actually I'm getting my master's right now in educational psychology, and my thesis is going to be on taking a digital test with bad UX writing, or what I determine to be bad UX, and best practices, and see if that affects the measurement of the test, whether the good students still do well and the bad students do as poorly as they normally do, or if it mucks up the entire measurement and the test is thrown out because the UX copy is so bad. So I'm hoping for the latter. I'm hoping it destroys things and makes my job look more important. And yeah, there's a lot of ways to test it. I'm sure Briana and Cassie have their experience to share too.
Yes, I would definitely echo that UX researchers are your best friend when it comes to this. Like, and speaking from Comcast and Xfinity products, we're lucky to have a lot of resources in this way where we can test things before it goes live. We can A/B test things in production with all kinds of user groups. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to measure success.
We don't have quite as many opportunities to A/B test as I would ideally like to have, but it really just depends on the individual situation. Sometimes it's pretty easy to figure out something's not working right because of what happens next. Really simple example, we just were updating the feedback form at the bottom of the website, and that's a great thing to be working on because you get to see the feedback from the feedback form and look at the quality of the feedback you're getting. So that was just, we figured out really quickly, like, oh, we didn't make that a required field, and this other section was actually doing some pretty helpful framing that we didn't realize. We asked people, what type of feedback do you have, and then provided a list of like 5 different radio buttons, and we didn't do anything with that information, but it impacted the quality of the feedback we got because it made people think about what kind of feedback they were going to provide in an open text field. So that is just not exactly a method for determining success, but it was really helpful for us, and we were able to adjust pretty quickly and get us back on track with the more useful feedback.
Okay, going down the list. Oh, well, suggestions on the homework. Okay, Bob, that was not a question, but
it was a bad joke.
Yeah, no, I've probably written some bad directions for kindergartners because it's very complicated. But Kate, you have a question that very much pertains to my professional journey. You're looking to move into UX writing from another genre. Looks like you're moving from academia and humanities. So I started my career at W.W. Norton, working on the humanities anthologies, the literary anthology of this, that, and that. So the trends, I mean, honestly, I think one of the keys to UX writing is, I don't know if you do editing or writing consulting, but I found my experience as a copy editor to be extremely aligned with UX writing, because it's all about consistency and clarity, and making sure that the way you phrase one thing at the beginning of the paper, you don't confuse the reader by changing the term later in the paper. And UX writing, I think, is a very reflective experience in that, where you want all the buttons that say one thing to take you to the same place. You want them to have the same function across the platform. So in terms of practicing short form clarity, I don't know the best way to actually practice it and get feedback if you don't have a community of people to do that with. But what I would say, if you have a good knack for writing and editing and you want to get into UX, I would pick up some books on UX. I think the really popular one is I'll put it in the chat. I got to look it up. But what I would do is audit existing products. There's bad UX writing everywhere. and put together a portfolio. Show an app in your phone, screen grabs in a PowerPoint, and then show how you would make it better and call that your portfolio. It doesn't have to be work you actually did. But I think that's, I mean, even for me, I was trying to break into this just 2 years ago because all my portfolio was behind government paywalls because I was doing government tests and I couldn't show my chops. So I created examples of what I would do. When I interviewed for a job, I'd go to their website and I'd audit their website and give some feedback. So I think that's a good way to at least showcase your skill set. Building your skill set with peer review and feedback, I think that's about building your network and asking for feedback. And I guess that's what you're doing tonight. So.
Yeah, I would recommend definitely tapping into the UX community. People have collected lists of good examples, brands they like, and just collect stuff that you notice in your day-to-day life that you think is really good. You know, a lot of people like MailChimp for certain things, and yeah, there's Conor doesn't like MailChimp, but that's all right.
I saw Mark mention in the chat the Hemingway editor or hemingwayapp.com. I use that almost every day. It is a really helpful tool both for checking your own writing, but particularly when you're working with someone else to say, hey, so you know that thing that you thought was really simple? It's a postgraduate reading level, so maybe we can explore some opportunities to break these sentences down a little bit. And so I use that, yeah, like I said, basically every day. But it is really helpful to practice with some real things you see out in the wild. In our case, it's often other municipal government websites. They have lots of opportunities for editing, where you can show some fantastic before and after contrasts. Would highly recommend those if you can tolerate it.
Yeah, take Hemingway with a bit of a grain of salt, though. And again, sometimes I think actually the way Hemingway says to do it is better than my editor thinks to do it, but it does make it a little bit choppy. And for some reason, we think we need to sound smooth and intellectual rather than as clear as possible sometimes. So I think that's an evolution, but it was revealing to me, you know, because I think I actually teach little classes on how to shorten up text and tighten up text, and people usually like it. And I found that tool really helped my own writing slim down, so to speak.
That's great. Thank you. I actually didn't know about that app, so I will definitely be checking it out.
It's really
Also,
good to give to engineers.
Oh, I was going to say, thanks for making the portfolio seem much more approachable too. I appreciate those suggestions.
Looks like we have 10 more minutes.
Jennifer, you have your hand raised.
Oh yeah, thanks guys. This has been so great so far. I really appreciate everybody's insight. Just wonder if anyone has any tips on how to balance conversational or human language or copy with also being concise. Are there any go-to methods on kind of mastering that you guys can share?
Anybody want to go first?
Go for it.
A trick that we use a lot is like, how would you explain this to your mom? Or how would you explain this to someone who's not tech savvy? Again, it goes back to this thing about clarity, and it will take some like attempts. And yeah, I'm going to think about it a little more.
Yeah, I think it's just really helpful when a whole organization, from that initial touch point, you know, pre-sales, all the way through to the part that I'm in, which is customer care, that tends to get forgotten. But it's really helpful when everyone uses, if you're going to call something, you know, define it and have everyone use it. And it's really tough in our organization because we have so many departments and so many people involved. But I think it's something to aspire to.
A never-ending quest for consistency, for sure.
But you know, and I mean, we even have a saying in technical writing: it's better to be consistently wrong. If you're going to be wrong, be consistently wrong.
Yeah, I would say in terms of being conversational and also concise. I think one of the ways that you get to that shorter version of something is just providing the information in context. I often see an impulse to provide all of the information that somebody needs up front, and that's where you can really get into an overwhelming wall of text. Even if you do make it conversational, it's still too much at the same time. And so spreading that out throughout a person's interaction with an application is really, really helpful. Because you can use that more conversational tone. And it's also more conversational because that's how you have a conversation. You don't stand there and talk at somebody for 5 minutes and then say, all right, now your turn. You just sprinkle things and let them do something. Exactly. So.
Yeah, and on my part, I find oftentimes my best friend are the constraints I'm given by designers. They'll tell me I only have X amount of characters to write into this container, and I got to do it. And then I've also got a voice chart that I created or someone else created for me, and I got to follow the voice chart. A voice chart is I don't know if everyone's familiar, but it's a UX writing tool where you kind of break the application down into 3 themes, and each theme will dictate the voice you use in certain situations and the type of punctuation you use. So if I'm working within a defined theme that has a voice that says don't use exclamation points, use a serious tone, and my designer tells me I've got 100 characters to fit into this container, I'll be pretty concise because that's all I got. I think when you kind of have those, I mean, UX writing in general, you got to be so concise, but sometimes people will be like, oh, you're a writer and you don't have control over exactly who your boss is, and all of a sudden as I was telling him before we started this, sometimes I just end up being asked to copyright a blog. So then all of a sudden I'm back in my old shoes of having to write the way I used to when I blogged. And then I got to transition back to UX writing. And it's almost like a schizophrenic balance. But yeah, I think guidelines and style guides and the wireframes you're given to work with help dictate the size of your text and your ability to stay within a conversational tone.
Yeah, it's also driven, oops, sorry. It's also driven a lot by who your audience is. If you know more about them and can use more tech savvy language, for example, or if it's a kindergartner, like the instructions on the homework should be simpler.
Yeah, I also would add, be very careful. The tech savvy is good, but be careful not to assume that people understand words. Like because sometimes you have to use a geeky word. I mean, sometimes you have to say something like modem. And that's one in our world that can mean a bunch of different types of devices. And, but yet every one of our customers has one. And, but if you can explain what you mean by that term, and again, then back to the consistency thing, consistently use that term for that thing. You make your customer's life much easier, even if your writing becomes a little more boring because you're repeating the same word a lot.
Yeah, that's a good point. I find that a lot of the job is just advocating for the customer, the end user, when a lot of the content is getting passed down from an engineering team or a product owner that's so deep in the subject matter that they're not considering that the people eventually reading these words may have no idea what they're talking about. So it helps to not have a technical background sometimes.
Yeah, we call that a layperson audit. Sometimes you want to pull in someone that doesn't have the technical background because they might be biased by understanding the terms already, and they may not catch those things that the layperson reader might not understand. A product I'm working on right now is a data science product within my organization that we're building for the US government. And the project manager on the federal side is an IT whiz and knows everything, but her boss is a director, a project manager who doesn't know what a platform data lake is or a SQL query. And I'm building UX strategies around data scientists navigating a data lake. And I don't know what that is, but I had to teach myself what it was. And then once I knew too much, I was allowing copy to fly that her boss didn't understand. She was giving me great feedback. But then when it went to external review, we got all this feedback that was like, this is too confusing. And I had to reinvent the wheel, the whole thing I've been working on, because I kind of forgot my audience was not just the client I interfaced with who was very tech savvy. So it's always good to just bring someone who understands UX writing, but may not be too familiar with the product or the subject matter, and just see what they think. And if it's confusing, you got to, go back to the drawing board.
Any other questions? I think we have time for probably one more.
If no one else does, I don't want to take up anybody else's time, but I had never heard of a voice chart before, and I'm really interested on whether there are any resources that you guys could recommend on how to, like, just to learn more about that, and
Well,
how to build one, how to start one. I don't know. It's a really cool concept that's completely new to me, so I want to like geek out on it a little bit.
well, the book I just linked in the chat, Strategic Writing. I mean, that is not what I thought it was called, but so the hyperlink might be throwing me. But
Strategic writing for UX.
Strategic Writing for UX by Tori Podjarmarski.
Uh-huh.
It's basically about how a voice chart dictates UX writing. It early on in the chapters, they talk about how to build one and then how to use it. And it's honestly less of a tool for you as a writer. It's a great tool to get buy-in on what you're doing. The marketers love to see it. The project managers love to see it. It allows them to kind of see where you're going and how there's a logical flow to each container and page, and the words you've chosen and the punctuation you're using. So for me, it's a good backup plan for when I've presented something that I've done a great deal of work to keep consistent, and then you kind of have that day where you present it. And one of the problems of being a writer when you're at a big organization is CEOs and all those higher up directors are all good writers. They all also know how to write, and they're going to wordsmith you like crazy when it's presentation day. So it's a good way to justify what you've chosen, because you're just that writer that went into it professionally. These other people might have, they might be great finance whizzes and also good writers, and they'll come at you. They'll wordsmith you and catch typos and all that. So it's nice to have that as a resource.
I was also unfamiliar with the term voice chart, but I assume it's along the lines of like voice and tone guidance, or we have like a tone library for different types of situations. Like I think you were talking about like a positive, a neutral, or a negative situation. And this all just comes with like documenting what your established style is so that you have that reference to go back to when you have to defend your word choices. But that's cool. Thanks for the link to that book.
Yeah, and I think I found a dummy voice chart. I mean, it's hard without the context, but let me see. Here's a link to a PNG of a voice chart.
Cool.
So the principles are efficient, safe, and community. So, whatever it is, it might be like an app to help you write about navigating the subway. And so when you're talking about how it's efficient, use these rules. When you're talking about it being safe, use these rules. When you're talking about how it engages the community, use these rules. So you can kind of flag each container as representing one of those themes, and then justify the way you use punctuation and everything else.
That's great. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
This was really cool. I appreciate the engagement.
Yeah, thank you. You guys were great.
Great. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you in the other room in 7 seconds.
And we'll keep seeing you in this room for 4 seconds.
Bye-bye.
35 because we started early. So hope everyone's been having a great time so far. In
Do
a
you know
minute, I'm
where-
going to open up the breakout rooms, choose your own feature.
Hey Ben, do you know where the recording gets saved in your computer?
Where it gets saved?
Yeah.
I'm not sure actually. It didn't tell you where it saved it?
No, but it
Okay.
was recording, so I'm hoping that. Okay, I think I found it. I don't know.
I might
I don't know
still
if
be
I-
recording. We'll find out.
Yeah, I just stopped mine. I'm not
I
sure
stopped
how that
mine
works.
too. Yeah.
I
Okay.
feel like Zoom typically creates its own folder when I would save
Okay.
like meetings. So if you like search for a folder called Zoom, that's where I remember them being saved.
Yeah, I have like 2 files there, so I think that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, one of them's audio and one of them's audio and video. I think.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll figure it out later. Cool.
And I just saw when I ended it, it said that your file will be at the end of the meeting will be converted to an MP4.
I see. All right, that's good to know.
Wow. Thank you guys so much for helping us save these for everyone. Really appreciate it.